I got to tell you, my first introduction to your films was my parents taking me to see Terminator 2 Judgment Day in theaters, which means the first scene of yours I ever watched, if you think about it, was a world ravaged by a nuclear bomb. And here we are, we're 35 years later, you're gearing up to tackle the subject again in a very different way. But I'd love to know, what is the difference between the filmmaker who told the story of the power of nuclear power 35 years ago in a fictional sense versus the filmmaker who's gearing up to tell the history of Hiroshima today?
Look, I've been thinking about this theme for a long time, since I was a kid, since I remember seeing, pamphlets that my dad had for how to build a fallout shelter during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then later reading John Hersey's book on Hiroshima, a very, very thin book, but very powerful, which was written in 1945, right after the event. I read it in the mid-60s. And that, I was expressing that. I was, having kind of a cathartic reaction to that when I was making the Terminator. And then obviously with Terminator 2, when Sarah's at the chain link fence and she gets incinerated and then blasted by the shockwave, I wanted to make it quite visceral for people. How am I different now? I don't know. I only hope that I know enough or have learned enough as a filmmaker to be able to do this subject justice. I certainly I know how to do the visual effects and all that. That's not really the issue. The issue is how to tell this as a human story and yet be truthful to what happened, to the horrific aspect of it. It'll be challenging to both be honest and authentic about what it was like, because to me that's the point of this. What was it like to witness a nuclear weapon? I want it to be visceral. I want it to be powerful. At the same time, how do I achieve some kind of poetic or spiritual level to it that kind of rises above that in terms of storytelling? I don't know. It's going to be very, very challenging. I haven't even started writing yet. I've got this book, right, that I've purchased. It's all there. You're holding it up, so you must be about to say something about it.
I just having read it start to finish, I can tell you just the stories in it are unbelievable. Really quick, you mentioned, obviously you are a man who knows how to do special effects. You're a filmmaker who, when possible, you create things in camera. You built the Alien Queen to fight Sigourney Weaver. You built basically the Titanic to sink into the water. And so I ask this question jokingly, but also not jokingly. You're not planning on building a bomb, right?
No. And by the way, I've evolved a lot in that regard as well. If I was doing Aliens today and there was no other history around it other than, Ridley's film prior to mine, the Alien Queen would be CG. We had to make a lot of cuts and cut around a lot of little flaws in the methodology back then, a lot of forced cuts. I didn't get to do what was in my mind. So, there's no limitation to that. I'm not a big advocate of doing things in camera. Certainly not like Christopher Nolan is, for example, who's quite adamant about it. To me, it's either one is a means to an end. I mean, I don't go out of my way to do CG for its own sake, but I certainly don't. And if something could be done in camera, great, sure. Why make it harder on yourself? But I certainly don't think it's an ethos or even an aesthetic anymore. So I would do a combination of all sorts of things. Some practical. If you've got the wreckage of a house that's on fire, it's going to be a house and it's going to be on fire. If it's a blast wave sweeping across the city, that's going to be a CG effect. I mean, we did that in '91. On Terminator 2. As soon as the technology was available, I made sure I had it in my hands and was using it. So to me, there's no ethos around that. It's really the higher question of what are you trying to show and what are you trying to say? I don't attach some kind of dogmatic aesthetic around in camera or practical. For me, it could be a mix. It's really just a means to an end.
Well, the ends are always amazing. Tsutomu Yamagata, so obviously survived both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, died days after you met him at his bedside. I'd love to know, if you don't mind, what is something that he told you in that final meeting 15 years ago, in his final days, that is most going to affect how you make this movie? And did he pass knowing that you were going to tell this story?
Yeah, he knew. He knew. He was quite lucid. Quite lucid. We had a long conversation. I mean, he was very skeletal. I mean, he was dying of cancer, and he was 93 at the time. But he told his version to me. A more compressed version, basically what he describes in the book. Um, and he told me that his message, all he wanted to say when he went out to these peace activist, meetings around the world and spoke, all he wanted to say was, if you can survive getting nuclear bombed twice and can find it in your heart to forgive the people that dropped them, then you, in your life, anybody that he was talking to, can forgive anything. You can forgive anything. And what he was saying is that it's up to us to break the cycle of trauma and hatred that propagates through these wars, these ethnic cleansings, all of these horrible things that happen throughout history. We have to break the cycle of our ability to dehumanize the other, the enemy, so that we can do these horrific things to them. And there's nothing more horrific in my mind than using nuclear weapons against other human beings. People often, people that have children, people that are children, I mean, nuclear weapons are weapons of mass destruction. They're not military weapons. They're not confined to a military theater of conflict. They're weapons of mass destruction. They're weapons of terror. They demean us as a supposedly intelligent species. And they may be the great filter that keeps us from going on to a civilization in centuries to come. And we need to deal with it. We need to deal with ourselves. It's not the technology that's the problem. It's us and our ability to hold on to hatred and to act on it.
Well, I was thinking that the Einstein quote where he says, "I don't know what weapons we will fight World War III with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones."
Yeah, and he had glimpsed the subatomic quantum universe, and he knew the power of the atom and of quantum effects, and he saw it all. And there have been visionaries throughout history that have seen stuff like this coming. But I think the power of this book will be that the average reader, maybe who hasn't thought about these things or hasn't studied it, can get a very palpable and powerful impact from it.
For sure. I hate to try to compare Titanic and Hiroshima, but both your 97 film and this book, I feel like are really fascinating looks into the human experience of the kind of moment in history that I think is really difficult for most of us to wrap our brain around and to comprehend. And I'm sort of curious, is there a similarity, a through line, a commonality between how you filmed Titanic sinking to how you're planning on showing the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Well, I think the thing that the two would most have in common is, a real pursuit of absolute historical veracity. Just like I wanted to imagine that I was able to take an audience through a time portal and put them on the deck of that ship and recreate that to the best of my human ability as a filmmaker. That's what I would do with Hiroshima. The only difference is that I won't put a fictional love story in the foreground and try to make it something that it isn't. I'll just tell the stories of Kenshi Hirata and Yamaguchi-san, and that should be sufficient, right? And there are some other little heart-wrenching vignettes as well that I can probably shoehorn in. And there was one other fella who was at both bombings, the only American that was at both bombings, which is Jacob Beezer, who was in both aircraft that dropped both bombs. And he had some very interesting long-term emotional reactions to that as well. By the time when they dropped the first bomb, everybody on the Enola Gay watched it. When it got to the second bomb, he looked away. He'd already seen it. He said it was like when you're looking down through the water, shallow water at the beach, and it stirs up the sand. and the bottom just disappears. That was in his mind, and he couldn't watch it the second time because he knew that that was 100,000 people. I mean, these are not stories. These are accounts. These are eyewitness accounts. I think it's just fascinating.
The story of the man with his wife's bones in the book, that's
Yeah,
the one
Kenshi Hirata.
I really hope that's a part of the narrative that you're telling.
Absolutely is. That'll be central, and Yamaguchi's story will be central. I mean, it's almost unfathomable, you know, and yet his memory of it was, after the fact, was so much about his relationship with her parents and how apologetic he was and how they released him from guilt. You know, that like his memory of it was the human memory of the relationships that were impacted by this horrific event. I don't think he could get his mind around the scale of what had happened. He was just going on instinct at that point when he went to find her. And he spent 2 days digging through the burned and compressed ruins of his house, oblivious to everything that was going around him. A firestorm that leveled the city, that spread across the city in the aftermath of the explosion. Yeah, you know, I mean, he was just focused on one thing. It's kind of an amazing love story if you think about it.
Honestly, whenever I read that in the book, I thought, God, what James Cameron could do with that story. I can't wait to see.
No pressure. It's probably the film that I find the most challenging. And you know, I don't mind challenges in making a film, but you know, every film is a work of art, an act of human communication, and I don't think I could have made this film. I don't even know if I can make it now, but I certainly couldn't have made it, you know, 10 or 20 years ago.
Well, I believe that you can make it now. Really quick before we let you go, the book draws a really interesting comparison between fiction and reality. It points out that in the case of both Titanic and Hiroshima, there were fictionalized stories published years before each one.
That's true.
That almost kind of predicted things were going to happen. The only reason I bring that up, sir, is because you have made not one, but 2 different movies about how dangerous AI can be. So in the spirit of fiction predicting real life events, what are we to make of that?
I know, look, and by the way, it's great to be considered, you know, a predictor, a Nostradamus or whatever. Arthur Clarke predicted the geosynchronous telecommunications satellite, I think, 25 years before one ever actually was created. But he wasn't a mover and shaker in that telecom business. He was just a guy that thought of it, you know. So I mean, you could be predictively accurate, but it doesn't mean years later when it's actually happening that you've got anything to add. You know, I'm trying to steep myself in, school myself on not only generative AI, which is obviously going to transform entertainment and filmmaking and so on, but also AGI, which I do think is a serious threat to human civilization as we know it. And I think we're just running pell-mell at it as fast as we can, just like we all, you know, tried to develop nuclear weapons as quickly as possible between, you know, the hydrogen bomb between the US and Russia and China and everything. You know, it feels very similar to me, you know, right now. You know, look, I think civilization is right now facing 3 existential threats that could take us out, and maybe they'll even interact in some combination. One is artificial superintelligence, the other one is nuclear warfare, and the third one is just human overshoot, which manifests as a complete degradation of the natural world, and climate change is a part of that, right? And all 3 require the same solution, which is all of us here in the crew of 8 billion on spaceship Earth working together to solve them. And historically, we've been absolute shit at being able to do that. We're just not good at it. We're just a bunch of fractious chimps, and we've got to evolve, you know. And we've got to evolve spiritually. We've got to evolve in the way we treat each other. Can that happen in time? I don't know. We're pretty resourceful. We made it this far.
I really hope that we're not referencing the Terminator in the opening pages of a book one day and saying, hey, you know, there was this movie that came out. Your team's going to kill me. I'm going to squeeze in one more if you don't mind, and then I promise I'll let you go. Just because I host a series here in Chicago called The Moments That Made Us. And I look back at the most iconic movie moments of all time with the people that gave them to us. And God knows with you, there are dozens that I could choose from. But if you don't mind, sir, because I've never asked you about it, would you mind if I asked you about the I'm Flying scene from Titanic? It was recently named one of the most iconic
the
shots.
I'm Flying scene with Jack and Rose at the bow.
Yeah, I'd love to know what you remember about shooting that.
Not the King of the World moment.
Correct.
I'd rather not talk about that. No, I'm kidding. No, that was a beautiful moment. You're talking about the moment we shot it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so two things. One, it was completely spontaneous and a moment of capture of every element coming together. The sunset, I mean, that was all natural. There's no digital effects there, right? It just happened right in front of the lens. And it was a fragile moment. It only lasted for a few seconds. But the reason we got it was meticulous planning. We were in rehearsal. We had rehearsal all in advance. I had like a little mock-up of the bow. I had just like a piece of railing, and I worked with Kate and Leo. And I said, look, if we're going to do this at sunset, we're going to have seconds. So let's work this out. And we talked about how the kiss would work, the choreography of she's flying and they wrap their fingers together, and then she kind of pulls him in to this embrace, and then she turns into the kiss, and they meet in the kiss in that kind of strange but really kind of romantic position. And I even drew with a Sharpie lips on my two hands, and I told them how I wanted them to like wait and hesitate and then smoosh and all that. I mean, it was meticulously planned like a space mission. And when we actually went to shoot it, we had, I want to say, like 2 minutes.
Oh.
We did 2 takes. Maybe we had 5 minutes. We had two. The lighting guys were running around. They were dropping filters in and turning the lights down to balance to the ambience. They're looking at the monitor. It was completely crazed. Kate sees the sun, sees the sky, and starts screaming. I was 100 feet away. Starts screaming at the top of her lungs, "Shoot! Shoot!" I have never heard an actor say shoot, but that's Kate. And we got 2 takes. One was out of focus, and the other one that's in the movie is out of focus for the first 7 seconds and then comes into focus, and nobody ever notices.
I've seen that movie a million times. I've never once.
Yeah.
Mr.
So
Cameron,
the gods of cinema blessed us that day.
Blessed all of us, as they have many times whenever a film ends with directed by James Cameron. Mr. Cameron, I fawn over you every time we speak, sir. My first interview, I was 20 years old, and you've been kind enough to include me in your press days. Ever since, the reason I love films is because what you've done when you've been behind the camera and everything between action and cut your entire career. So I cannot wait to see what you do with this. I'm praying it's next, and hopefully you and I can geek out in person with Avatar.
We can geek out about that, and I strongly suspect we'll be geeking out about Avatar 3 in a few months as well at some point.
Well, I always end our interviews with a hug when we're in person, so be looking forward to that probably in London in a couple of months.
We're actually doing the premiere in Paris.
Oh! You know what?
And the press, I have not gotten any pushback on that from anybody, by the way.
They're not gonna. You're James Cameron. They're not gonna push you back. Good to see you again, Mr. Cameron. I'll see you in person in a couple of months. Please thank your team for me.
All right. Thank you, Jake.
Good to see you, sir.